Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Today is another Ficus Friday, and I'll be working on my Ficus microcarpa trees today, and I'll be focusing on the root base. This is the root base on my Ficus microcarpa. This was my very first bonsai that I started from a seed, and it's about 26 years old now. This root base is styled quite differently from some of my other ficuses, and they're also Ficus microcarpa, so I'll show you all the different root bases on my Ficus microcarpas, and I'll talk about each one and how they differ in style. I've styled the roots in this tree to look like a tropical banyan tree, where there's a lot of aerial roots coming off the trunk and going down into the soil, flowing really nicely. I want to keep a separation. I don't want this to become like a cone of roots. So I want to be able to always look in and see the original trunk in here. And I'll show you the difference. My other Ficus microcarpa, my Ficus Fancy, I'll show you that next. And that's more of that kind of cone of roots where you get this great big thick triangular base. This one I want more like the rocket fin roots, where I've got a root coming out, flaring out into the ground, and then you can look in and see the original trunk. And then I have another root that flares out down into the ground. So you can always see in at the trunk, and it looks like the base of a rocket with all these fins going around. Here's the root base on my other Ficus microcarpa, the one I call Fancy because the trunk is made up of mostly roots. And you can see it's a different form. You can't really see a single trunk if you look in between the roots. It's more of just a mass of roots in sort of a triangular form. So I'm trying to get it to transition from the soil and kind of flow up towards the top of the tree. So I'm still, it's still a work in progress. But you can see it's a totally different trunk style. I can't look in and see a single trunk in the middle. I don't have like those rocket fin roots going around. Here's a look at another Ficus microcarpa. This is the one I call plain because I wanted a very plain looking trunk. Not a lot of fancy aerial roots. Just seeing the bark and coming up to a single trunk and then dividing up top into a canopy. So there's a couple of things different on this trunk. Because the canopy is quite high, you can see the sun has hit the bark on this tree, and it's turned it almost a grayish white color. So my other ficuses don't really have that too much at the moment, but that's a sign of mature bark on a ficus, is when it turns this kind of whitish, very light gray color. That's when you know it's an old tree and it's been exposed to a lot of sunlight. So yeah, I like the color of this trunk. It's really nice. It's a ghostly white color. And this represents a tree that isn't really in a humid environment. There's no aerial roots falling down out of the branches or coming out of the trunk line. So it's a different style for a Ficus microcarpa. That's a look at three trees, all of the same species, but they all have their own style of root base. There's no right or wrong with the root base of a ficus. You can develop it any way you want. It's just whatever appeals to you. I'm back to the first Ficus microcarpa that I'll be working on today, and that's my very first bonsai tree, the one I grew from seed. I'll be doing some root work correction and some top trimming here in the bonsai zone. The roots on a ficus tree always need correction. As the roots thicken up and grow, it changes the appearance of a tree. So you can imagine if I left all these roots on here, in another 10 years they would thicken up and they would all start fusing together, and I would get this very smooth base to the tree. It would be sort of a conical root base going up to the trunk. It would look fine, but I would lose all these fine aerial roots, which give the tree a nice miniature look. If you look at pictures of ficus root bases, giant trees in nature, one of the characteristics of a ficus tree is they're always generating these aerial roots. And so the tree is always surrounded by these fine aerial roots coming down, and the root base has all these fine aerial roots coming off the trunk. So if I leave all these roots on, they'll thicken up in the next 10 years and it'll lose that miniature appearance. So you've always got to be removing roots and growing new aerial roots to keep that fine network of roots on display. If you don't do that, your trunk will fuse together all these roots and it'll become very smooth and kind of boring looking. So I always want to have all these cavities in here where you can see the trunk. I want fine roots on it all the time. So I may be replacing some of these roots today, removing some of the thicker ones, and replacing them with finer roots for the future. Here's a close-up of the root base, and I was keeping my eye on a couple of roots. One was this thick snake-like root that went across the surface of the soil. A really nice root, but it is starting to get a little thick. And in the last video where I was doing root work on this tree, I repositioned this one coming down the front. It was on an angle and I kind of straightened it up, and that improved the look of it. But it is also getting quite thick, and these two roots are kind of the thickest ones that are noticeable at the moment, and I may have to begin replacing them. If you look at the thickness of the root compared to the thickness of the trunk, I would say it's maybe a quarter the thickness of the trunk. And I certainly don't want them to go any thicker than that. I think if it gets thicker, the tree starts to lose its miniature appearance. So I'm going to evaluate whether I need to remove those today. Another thing that I'm starting to notice is that I have a lot of roots coming out from the trunk at this level. I would rather stagger them. So, I've got this one down lower here, another one lower here. There's some higher up over here. So I don't want, a ring of roots coming out of the trunk from one level. I want to have it staggered so it looks quite, random or, natural looking. That aerial root that's coming down from the front, it's also hiding some really nice roots behind, ones that come down the trunk and flow really nicely into the soil, whereas this root doesn't really flow nicely into the soil. It does have a root coming off of it, another aerial root coming off an aerial root here. And there's also one behind, but I don't think the one behind made it into the soil. It's still flexible, so it shows it's still a living root, but it hasn't made it into the soil. So I could remove that root up to here and, further develop this one off to the side. I don't know if that would look good though. And I would still be left with this 1, 2, 3 roots coming from kind of the same plane here. So I'm thinking I should remove this root here. I was going to do it last time, but I repositioned it and it hasn't grown on me, put it that way. I would say it's borderline acceptable, but I think for the future of this tree, looking in the front view of this tree, I've got these nice roots each side of this root. I think this root needs to be removed. I'll rotate the tree around so I can get at that root easily, and then I'll come in and cut it off. All right, here I go. This will leave a scar at the front of the tree, but it'll probably generate more aerial roots coming out from the cut point. Here I go. Just like that. So you can see it's separated from the tree at the top now. I'll come in now and remove the root from the base down here, snipping away all the roots that are attached to the ground. Not too many thick ones. Mostly fine roots. Like that. So, yeah, there's just a few fine roots coming off of this aerial root. And that is done. Now, the next task is to come up front and see if I've ruined the tree or not. So let's have a look. There's a look at the tree from the front. And I think it looks better, actually. I like it without that big, thick root hanging down on the front. I do have another smaller root at the front coming out that I may want to prune away also. So I think I'll do that. Here's a look at that other smaller root. It comes from the front of the trunk right here and goes down into the soil. It's just a small root, but that root will develop into quite a thick root in the future. They always do on ficus trees. So again, I want to get rid of that before it becomes a bigger problem. So I'll snip it off up there and down at the soil level here, and it's gone. There are some other roots at the base down here. They kind of spiral down. They grew there naturally. So I'm not going to remove those. I like roots, aerial roots that grow alongside the trunk. They kind of grip the surface of the trunk. Those are the hardest roots to grow on a ficus, so I'm not going to touch those. I don't think they'll become a problem in future, but, you know, someday they'll probably fuse in with the trunk and you may not even notice them anymore. Ficus trunks tend to smooth out as they get older. Everything kind of blends in with each other. So I'll leave those natural roots on the tree. I think all the other aerial roots look very good. I've got, you know, one growing way up here, one here, one down lower. These two are almost at the same height, and there's another one that's similar here, but at the moment it doesn't bother me at all. I think that still looks quite good. I've got roots coming out down here, one here. So at all different heights on the trunk, I think it looks really natural at the moment. The next largest root on the tree is that snake-like root. That one right there. And it's a really nice looking natural root. And I hate cutting it off because it's got so much nice natural movement to it. Yeah, you couldn't ask for a better root. It is starting to get a little thick. It's the thickest surface root on the tree at the moment. It's also kind of an important root because the roots on the right-hand side of the tree here are getting quite dense and heavy. And that snake-like root on this side kind of counterbalances the root system, so it's not so one-sided. So there's that advantage to that, you know, that root being thick like that. And it's not too thick. I would say, you know, maybe it's a less than a quarter the thickness of the trunk, especially at the base there. So I don't think it's a major problem at the moment. And next time I repot it, if I reduce the roots all around the tip of that root, I can possibly reduce the vigor in it. Yeah. I don't think I'll remove it today. I think that will be a decision for the future. See how the tree develops. I think for today it looks good. There's another root over here. There's a root coming off of this root that kind of crosses over top of this other one here and into the soil. And I'm trying to decide if I like that or not. It kind of goes against my view of being able to look in between the roots and see the trunk. That crossing root kind of, it'll fuse with this one eventually, and it'll create kind of a root plane out in midair, and then I'll have the space between it. Again, it's a nice natural looking root. If I get rid of it, maybe the root base will look too radial. It won't look natural enough. I don't know. It would take some of that weight off the right-hand side of the root base, so it looks a little less heavy. It also, this root comes down. It comes down and divides into three. There's one root coming forward here and two behind. Yeah, that root divides into three, and it's getting a bit of a bulge right there at the base where all those roots divide. So it would certainly help that bulge if I got rid of that one coming forward. I think if I cut that off, I won't regret cutting it off. And And I may regret leaving it on in future if that bulge on the root gets thicker. So I'm going to have to cut it off. It's a tough decision. And, you know, again, there's no real right or wrong to it. The root base will look good no matter what, if I kept that root or if I got rid of it. So it's a minor detail. So I'm going to cut it off just because I don't want it to get too thick in this area here. And I have a feeling it will if I keep that root on. Because this root coming out front here, it's gaining a lot of vigor. So yeah, I'm going to remove that. All right, I'll come in with the branch cutters because I am looking to get a fairly nice cut in there. And I think I'm going to have to cut it off first, just roughly to here. And I'll remove it from the soil also. So I'll come down here and here. And one more cut. Oh, two more. Like that. There. And now I'll see if I can get in with the branch pruners. I think I can. Like, oh, that's too far. Like that. Okay, here I go. I think I got through it. Yeah, like that. Okay, so that's removed. I will have to do a bit of cleanup here. I think that's about as good as I can get that. There's a close-up of where I removed that root. So I still have 3 roots going down into the soil here. I'll just wash off that latex off the trunk there. Like that. Give it a bit of a watering. And then I'll step back and have a look at the root system and see if there's any further work I can do. Here's a look at the front view of the tree. I think the root base is looking quite good. It looks very miniature. It looks like a mature ficus tree. The canopy is a little ragged. I've just been pruning it to a kind of a dome or umbrella shape for the moment. And then in the future, as this tree matures, I'll be getting kind of variation in the canopy. So some branch distinction. So it won't be just one big green dome on top. It'll have, you know, you'll be able to see layers and into the interior of the tree a bit. And sort of like what I did on my Sarissa tree. I'll show you that, and I'll just show you what the canopy looks like on that now. Here's a look at the canopy on my Sarissa tree. This is styled to look like an African acacia tree, so the canopy is quite flat compared to, you know, the ficus. But you can see the variation in the canopy where it's kind of got pads. The branches come up, and there's slight different heights to them, some separation between them, and it gives it more of a miniature look rather than a pruned smooth canopy that looks more like topiary. Yeah, it gives it a better miniature look. And I'm still developing this canopy. You'll see it improve hopefully over the next few years. And the tree itself, it'll grow a little wider and fit the pot a little better. But I do like that separation of the branches in the canopy and the slight different heights of the branches to break it up so it doesn't look too smooth. I'm going to go from the root base of the tree, up the trunk, up the branches into the canopy now. There's a lot of growth on top that needs pruning back. It's starting to get a little too tall, and it's out of the profile of the tree. There's some branches that are kind of growing towards the inside of the tree that need cleaning up and removing. And there's also some yellow leaves on the interior that needs, you know, removal and maybe a little bit of thinning so it gets light to all the branches. Here's some of the yellow leaves up here that I'm just going to remove by hand. They're ready to fall off anyway. They're just older leaves that are reached the end of their lifespan, and they're just going yellow and falling off. As the tree branch grows, it kind of, the older leaves start to come off naturally. there's a certain lifespan for the leaves, and they've just reached the end of their life. Replaced with the new ones. There's another one here. So you can see how yellow they are. I'm not going to leaf prune the tree today. I just want it to grow strongly for next year. When you have a ficus that's growing really strongly, they put out a lot of aerial roots. And that's what I'm looking for. Both from the trunk and the branches, I'm hoping. I have in the past gotten some nice aerial roots coming off the branches and dropping down into the soil, and I want to continue that trend. I want, eventually more aerial roots dropping down. I think that will give it a nice banyan tree style and look. Okay, so that's got all the older dead leaves out of the canopy. Yeah. So next I'll start doing some pruning. One thing you'll notice on this tree is that I'm developing all those upright trunks or branches to form the canopy, and then off of those upright branches I get more horizontal branches, and it starts filling in the canopy, so you get a really nice umbrella shaped canopy on the tree, and that's starting to happen as it matures. So I'm going to go in now and I'm going to look at the structure of each branch, and I want all the divisions of the branches to go from 1 to 2, and that will avoid any future problems of bulging in that area where maybe 3 or 4 branches are coming off from the same spot. So I'll just have to go through each branch. I'm looking for branches that cross each other. I'll remove the crossing branches. On the lower branches, maybe branches that are going straight up, I'll remove those. And just, a general maintenance pruning to the upper structure. I'll demonstrate on this branch. I have one branch coming out and this branch has died off, so I'll just clean that up like that. And then it comes out and there's 2 branches coming off quite low on the branch, and then there's 2 kind of vertical branches coming up at the tip. So I'm going to remove all that vertical growth and keep this sort of horizontal growth. So I'll just prune the tip off here like that. Now I've got another 3rd branch at the back here. So I should remove one of those branches also, so I have this branch dividing into 2. I think I'll remove this one at the back here. It doesn't flow very nicely. Like that. So that branch is cleaned up, and also just prune the tip back a bit. Like that. I'll continue that type of work on all the branches. Often, what guides me on, which branches to keep and which ones to remove, I'm always looking for flow lines. Beautiful, smooth flow lines. So I don't want branches coming up and then changing direction abruptly. I want everything to flow smooth and graceful, and it'll make a really beautiful tree in the end, I hope. So that kind of guides me a lot on my decision-making process when it comes to branch pruning. As I'm pruning, I'm keeping my overall profile in mind, pruning back these longer shoots to keep them within the profile. And I'm always pruning back to outward facing leaves. So I'm kind of doing clip and grow to get the new branches growing in the right direction, fanning outwards from the tree. I'm doing a lot of tip removal also to get more ramification. As I'm pruning the tree, I'm also removing some of the leaves that are kind of pointing downwards on branches, leaves that are pointing towards the interior of the tree, and it kind of lightens the canopy up and gets more light into the branches, the interior of the tree. As I'm pruning the tree, you'll see that you can see more of the branch structure because I'm thinning the canopy out, rounding it front to back and side to side. I'll rotate the tree to the side view, and you can see I've rounded the canopy going towards the front, and now I have to do the same for the back also, keeping that umbrella shape. So it's a little long in this section, so I'll have to prune back some of these branches just to get it back in shape. I've got the tree pruned up now, and there is still a lot of branches in the upper canopy that need to be sorted out. And I'm kind of reluctant to do it until I defoliate the tree. I don't really want to kind of be guessing in there. I can see the structure, but it's hard to know, if you remove this branch, what it will do to the canopy. You might get a giant hole there or something. So when I can see the branch structure more clearly after I defoliate the tree next, I'll do that. I'll prune up that upper structure and sort it out. But, it's not too bad for now. But there are a few branches that crisscross and could be cleaned up. But so, yeah, I've got the pruning done. I've got the rounded canopy restored. I've done a lot of thinning, a lot of structural work to the outside of the branches. Yeah, so it's definitely improved the tree as far as looks. I think removing that root also improved the look of the tree. Those couple of roots. Yeah, so it's funny, this tree. I may have told you this before, but as I was growing this tree from a seed, I had so many people tell me that it's too tall and skinny. Cut the trunk down. It'll never look good with that tall, skinny trunk. And now, after 25 years, that tall, skinny trunk is starting to thicken up, and the tree is starting to look in proportion for the first time in its life. And as that trunk thickens, it'll just continue to look better and better over the years. And as that canopy branch structure develops, it'll just keep improving. So, yeah, so, when someone tells you that your tree is too tall and skinny, it may be at that particular moment in time, but if your intention is to grow it to a medium to a large-sized tree, then quite often that tall, skinny trunk needs to be tall and skinny, and your branches start quite high in the tree. Because as it develops and thickens up in the future, all those lower branches will be at the right height, and your tall, skinny trunk will thicken up, and it'll all start to look in proportion. So yeah, if you have a size and a design intent for the tree, you're the one making all the decisions. Keep those decisions in your mind as you prune the tree. And don't listen to other people if they tell you, well, your trunk's too tall and skinny, you got to cut it in half and develop branches down lower. And, stick to your design intent is what I'm saying, is listen to others, but, everything you do to the tree should be towards your envisioned design for the future. That's all the work I'll be doing on my Ficus microcarpa, my very first bonsai that I grew from a seed. We looked at the root base styling, the upper canopy styling, and a bit of the trunk styling today. And I'll be doing that same process for my other two Ficus microcarpas, my Ficus sisters, Ficus Plain and Ficus Fancy. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me today in the Bonsai Zone.